Alright, hello. Let's talk more about freedom of speech. We all should be for... let me zoom in a little bit. Alright. We all should be for freedom of speech. And let's see, but there are some things that are not freedom of speech. Let's talk about it. There's a commonly used hypothetical scenario when talking about freedom of speech. Yelling fire in a crowded theater. Or yelling fire in a theater. It's assumed when people give this hypothetical scenario, there is no fire, and so you're causing a panic. People might get crushed to death, stomped to death, die from heart attacks from the stress. When there's a stampede because of a fire that doesn't exist that you were proclaiming. Alright, so, yeah, there is definitely no freedom of speech. When we say freedom of speech, we are definitely not calling for it to be legal to cause harm to people indirectly by causing a panic or people get trampled. So there are limits to the words that come out of your mouth being free speech, but there should be no limits on what we actually mean when we say free speech. So free speech does not mean you get to lie about things. Now you can have your subjective opinion about anything, that's your free speech, but if you state an objective lie, misstate something that's an objective fact, so-and-so is the KKK, actually, but that person isn't, and they're the opposite of the KKK, or so-and-so is a Nazi, but the person's actually a Jew who does not believe in socialism, you've definitely crossed way over the line of freedom of speech when you lied about somebody. Especially if that lie could get them hurt. There are people eager to cause violence to other people, and their supposed excuses, so-and-so is a Nazi, so-and-so is a hater, so-and-so is a white supremacist. Well, since there are some people that are very eager to get violent, if you lie about somebody that makes them a target for those people eager to get violent, then you have a moral and should have a legal responsibility to get punished for that lie, to pay out the nose, don't lie about people. You should pay for bodyguards for them for the rest of their life if you were metaphorically drawing a target on their back by lying about them. Now, if somebody really is a white supremacist, Nazi, it's not lying, and that is your freedom of speech to talk about things that are true. Just thought about something else to add to the list. Okay. So, sometimes when the subject of freedom of speech comes up, the bad people who need to repent, who are against our freedom of speech, well, but what if there's violence? What if people get hurt? Okay. Anything that reasonably leads to violence is not covered by freedom of speech, well, unless it's the truth. I mean, if somebody really did commit that murder, really did do the child molesting, really is a white supremacist, then you are not violating the principle of freedom of speech if you point that out. But there are some lies that are spoken so often now, an intelligent person knows it's probably not true when somebody's accused of something. The lie about people being Nazis and the lie about people being white supremacists, or hating people, those are very common lies now. So if you're an intelligent person, you should realize that those lies are very common, and people accused of certain things probably aren't that thing. So, see, me saying so-and-so is wrong, me accurately quoting you is not hurting you. Me calling you whatever name I want to is not hurting you, so that's not violence. That's not verbal violence. Even if I'm not being nice, it's not violence. It should be covered by free speech. Me telling somebody else, go hit him, go kill him, that would be violence, and that is not covered by freedom of speech. But differences of opinion about things, having a negative opinion about somebody, is not violence. Calling somebody what you really honestly believe they are. You know, if you really think somebody is a man because he's born with the male body parts and every single cell in his body has the right chromosomal combination to be a man, it is not violence at all to call that person a man. If the person is a man and you just want to call him a girl to be mean, we shouldn't waste police time and taxpayer money, especially in countries that are in debt and have national debts, to, you know, punish people for that. Okay, so lying. One of the things the U.S. Constitution actually does describe is having a court system, and it lists libel and slander in the Constitution. Your freedom of speech does not include lying. So if they really aren't putting poison in the soda bottles, you don't get to say they're putting poison in the soda bottles. Or whatever other examples of lies you can think about. You know, if this or that, just because you disagree with somebody does not mean they belong on the same list as the Ku Klux Klan. Unless you accurately title that list, people with whom I disagree, or groups with whom I disagree. But the Ku Klux Klan does really, a very small number of them out there, really do hate people because of their skin color. They are small enough for any honest person to say they are not influential in anything. But if you're making a list that has them on it, and you call it a hate list, you do not have a freedom of speech to put everyone you disagree with on that list. Any groups that have done that, they owe, I'm not claiming legal expertise here, morally, they owe bodyguards for life for all the groups and people on those lists that are the same, you know, on the same list as the Ku Klux Klan, but are not haters like the Ku Klux Klan. Pornography. It's not violating the principle of freedom of speech if the government punishes pornography. A naked picture and or video of people having sex, or a description of somebody's sexual encounter, has absolutely nothing to do with me being able to say, so-and-so is a bad idea for a candidate for office. This law is a bad idea. We should make this thing illegal. This person in the government did this action. It's a scientific evidence. This and that has never happened, so it should not be in a science textbook. This is a logical, this is logical conclusion based on the evidence we see. It's based on the evidence we see. It should be in the textbooks. All that, this or that is a sin. This or that isn't a sin. God does want you to do this. God doesn't want you to do that. All that stuff. That has absolutely nothing to do with pornography. If pornography is punished and banned, then I still will be able to do all that other stuff, which is stuff that is protected by the principle and accurate application of the Constitution. Okay, I've seen a video where some guy said, "My freedom of speech," when he got up in the middle of an auditorium full of people, or he was in the audience of the auditorium, and was interrupting the speaker. Your freedom of speech does not mean you get to interrupt a speaker somewhere. Actually, that's the opposite of freedom of speech. Well, if we're talking about an individual without the government telling them to do it, that's got nothing to do with the Constitution's literal meaning, but the principle behind it. You're violating the principle behind the freedom of speech if you prevent somebody else from speaking, whether by shouting them down, as a mob or an individual, with loudspeakers or unaided voice. You do not get to interrupt people and say, that's my freedom of speech. No, your freedom of speech is for you to go to the scheduler of that auditorium and reserve it for yourself for whenever else somebody else hasn't reserved it. Alright, it's not a violation of the freedom of speech for the government to have laws banning revealing of military secrets. The principle of the freedom of speech is not violated by any government saying, alright, you know what our materials are, you know where our troops are, you know how our technology works, you tell anyone we kill you. That's not a violation of the principle of freedom of speech. It's not unconstitutional in America that we have laws about classified information and law enforcement sensitive information. It's not a violation of the freedom of speech of a police officer at any level of government if the agency has a policy, you don't tell people if they're a suspect or under investigation. It's not violating somebody's freedom to a fair trial if, you know, they get to find out what's happening before they're even charged. It would be a violation of the fair trial principle if they don't get a fair trial, but that doesn't mean when we're trying to figure out if they've committed a crime so we can arrest them, or if there's evidence enough to look into it that they get to know about that. Comedians. Comedians, they should be allowed to make jokes. Even if somebody is offended by the joke. It's a sad day when a comedian has to, has to worry about being locked up for being funny. If you want changes in society, guess what? You might need comedians to have their freedom of speech too. To make jokes about things that don't make sense that are going on in a society. So that's my list of what people don't mean when they talk about freedom of speech. What is not covered by the United States Constitutional Amendment Number 1 and or just the underlying principles of that amendment, or the concept of our freedom of speech. So, thank you for watching. You have a good day. And be a free speech extremist. It's a good thing.